The wine glass shattered between them. Mercy stood frozen, red liquid dripping from her fingertips, eyes locked on Michael's face. It wasn't the glass that made her flinch, it was the silence that followed, deafening and familiar. Michael's eyes burned with words he wouldn't say. His lips pressed into a tight line. This had become their routine. Misunderstandings turned to silence, pain buried beneath politeness, and anger drowned in stillness. Mercy wanted to scream, but the silence between them had become a language of its own, one she was no longer fluent in. Michael finally turned away, picking up his phone, pretending she wasn't there. Mercy walked to the sink, trembling. She whispered, "Talk to me." But he didn't answer. She didn't know if he was angry, disappointed, or just done. And that was the worst part, when love turns into a guessing game, and the only sound in the room is the ticking of a clock counting down to the end. Mercy stared at the letter in her hand, her fingers shaking. She'd found it tucked inside Michael's old journal, a letter addressed to someone named Adiz. The handwriting was his, unmistakably. "I wish things had worked out between us," it read. Mercy's world tilted. For months she had felt Michael drift away, but she blamed stress, blamed herself, even blamed the weather. Now she saw the truth hidden in ink. There had been someone else. Someone he'd never mentioned. And suddenly the silence made sense. It had been guilt all along. That evening, she placed the letter on the table between them. Michael glanced at it, then at her, and said nothing. His silence was louder than a confession. "You didn't even plan to tell me, did you?" she asked softly. He shook his head. That was the first honest moment they'd had in weeks. And somehow it hurt more than the lie. Mercy walked out of the room, her heart in her throat. Trust hadn't been broken with a scream. It had died quietly, in the silence between them. Days passed, and Michael remained distant. Mercy kept pretending everything was fine, cleaning, cooking, smiling for neighbors. But inside she was unraveling. She started following him, just once, to prove to herself she was wrong. But she wasn't. She saw him at the cafe, laughing with a woman whose face glowed too warmly. Her hands trembled as she took the photo, not to confront him, but to remind herself she wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining the distance. The silence had a face now. Back home, she placed the photo in his briefcase. She didn't say a word. Michael found it the next morning, paused, then left without comment. No fight. No denial. Just more silence. Mercy realized the truth wasn't just between them. It had become them. And yet she couldn't leave. Not yet. Something was holding her back. Thread of hope maybe, or fear. Or maybe a secret of her own. Mercy stood in the bathroom, watching two pink lines form on the pregnancy test. Her knees buckled. It was too early, too dangerous, too wrong. How could she bring a child into a world where silence strangled love? But as tears rolled down her cheeks, something inside her whispered, "This child might be your second chance." She clutched the test to her chest, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. That night she watched Michael sleep. She almost whispered, "I'm pregnant." But then she remembered the silence that greeted every truth she ever offered him. So she said nothing. She would protect this child with or without him. But she also realized that secrets were multiplying between them like cracks in glass. And the more they grew, the more dangerous the silence became. The woman showed up at Mercy's door. No warning. No shame. She introduced herself as Adiz, said she was just there to clear the air. Mercy laughed bitterly. Clear the air. There's no air left. Adiz looked sincere, even nervous. He said you were the reason he stayed. But I always wondered, if he stayed out of duty or love. Mercy didn't reply. Her silence wasn't out of politeness. It was survival. After Adiz left, Mercy collapsed on the floor. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. Everyone around them had become part of a story she never agreed to be in. Her voice was a footnote in a book Michael had been writing with someone else. And yet, she still hadn't told him about the pregnancy. Maybe it was because she wanted to leave without a trace. Or maybe, deep down, she wanted to watch him beg. Either way, the silence was about to shatter. Mercy received an anonymous message on her phone. "Leave before it's too late." Her breath hitched. At first, she thought it was a prank, until the second message arrived with a photo. Her walking into her compound, alone, vulnerable. Fear gripped her chest. Had Adiz sent it? Or someone else from Michael's tangled past? She couldn't tell. But what terrified her more was Michael's reaction. He dismissed it with a shrug. "Probably a spammer," he said, unconcerned. Mercy began to sleep with a knife under her pillow. Her silence was no longer passive. It had become defensive. The house she once called home now felt like a battlefield, and Michael, once her protector, now felt like a stranger she was trapped with. The unspoken had festered into paranoia, and she no longer knew which was more dangerous, the lies outside or the silence inside. Mercy visited her mother for the first time in months. As they sat under the guava tree, her mother looked into her eyes and said, "There's something dead behind your smile." Mercy broke down. She confessed everything, well, almost. She left out the pregnancy, unsure if even her mother could understand. Her mother didn't ask many questions but gave her a simple warning. "No matter what you do, don't let silence become your legacy." Driving back, Mercy felt torn. Her mother's words echoed in her heart. Could she raise a child in a house haunted by silence and deceit? That night, she stood in the doorway of the nursery she'd secretly begun to prepare. She whispered into the emptiness, "I'll protect you, baby. Even if I have to do it alone." It was the first time in weeks she'd spoken aloud to someone, even if that someone hadn't yet been born. Late at night, Michael's phone rang, and he stepped out to answer it. Something in his hurried movements made Mercy follow. She watched through the crack of the back door as he paced, voice low but urgent. "You weren't supposed to come here." "No, she suspects nothing." Mercy's heart dropped. He wasn't just hiding secrets. He was still actively covering them. She stepped back silently, returning to bed before he saw her. When he returned minutes later, she pretended to be asleep. But her mind raced. She wasn't just dealing with emotional abandonment. There was deception woven into every minute of their marriage. Seriously about leaving. Not out of revenge, but survival. The next morning, Mercy set a trap. She told Michael she knew everything without giving details. His eyes darted, fear, guilt, confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked. She handed him a folder filled with printed call logs, the photo from the cafe, and the anonymous texts. "I've been quiet," she said. "But silence doesn't mean ignorance." Michael snapped. "You've been spying on me. You don't trust me." The irony made her laugh, a bitter, cold laugh. "I stopped trusting you the moment you stopped talking to me." The silence afterward was heavy, dangerous. They stood in that tension, hearts pounding. This time the silence wasn't empty. It was a countdown to war. Mercy installed a hidden camera in their living room. Paranoia had become her new reality. She needed proof. Of what, she didn't even know anymore. Maybe betrayal. Maybe danger. Maybe the truth. What she captured shook her to her core. 2 nights later, while she was asleep, Michael brought a man into their home. They spoke in low tones, but the words were clear. "She's pregnant, but I'll handle it. Just be patient." Mercy nearly passed out watching the footage. Who was the man? What did "handle it" mean? Her hands trembled as she backed up the footage to a flash drive. There was no longer any room for confusion. The silence between them wasn't just emotional. It was a weapon now. Mask. Trap. And Mercy had to find a way out before it swallowed her whole. Mercy packed a small bag with essentials: her prenatal vitamins, the flash drive, and a few clothes. She'd reached her limit. The silence wasn't just suffocating, it was turning lethal. She planned to leave at dawn before Michael woke. But as she zipped up her bag, a floorboard creaked behind her. Michael stood there, arms folded. Going somewhere. His voice was calm, too calm. She forced a smile. "Just visiting my mother." Michael stepped closer. "Take the baby stuff too?" he asked, eyeing the folded onesies. Mercy lied again. "She wants to see them." He nodded but didn't move. That night she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, praying for strength. She didn't know what scared her more, that he'd stop her from leaving, or that he wouldn't. Mercy made a bold move and confronted Adiz. She needed answers. The woman was shocked to see her but welcomed her inside. "You think I'm your enemy?" Adiz asked. "I broke it off years ago." Michael wouldn't let go. Adiz showed Mercy a string of texts, pleas from Michael to meet, to rekindle what they once had. "He said you were fragile, that you couldn't survive without him." Mercy's face went pale. That was how he saw her. A dependent. A burden. She left the house trembling. Heartbroken not just by the betrayal but by how little he respected her. For so long, she thought silence was her shield. Now she saw it had been his leash. Mercy hired a private investigator, a woman named Ejiro who had a reputation for discretion. In just a few days, Ejiro uncovered something Mercy never saw coming. Michael wasn't just cheating. He was laundering money through a business registered in her name. The pregnancy wasn't his concern anymore. It was her silence that was valuable to him now. Mercy nearly collapsed hearing it. Her life, her identity, her baby's future, all entangled in Michael's lies. She thanked Ejiro and promised to contact a lawyer. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just legal anymore. It was personal. He'd stolen her voice. Now she would take it back. Mercy wrote a letter. Not to Michael, but to her unborn child. In it, she explained everything. The silence, the lies, the love that once was. She tucked the letter into a small journal she'd kept hidden since the day she found out she was pregnant. Then she took the flash drive, the journal, and her courage and walked out the door. Michael wasn't home. She didn't know where he was. Maybe it was better that way. Her silence would be the last thing he ever heard from her. She slipped away like a ghost, but not as a victim. As a survivor. The silence between them had finally said everything it needed to. Mercy sat in the courtroom, calm but firm. With the help of her lawyer and Ejiro's findings, she filed charges for identity fraud and financial theft. Michael walked in, shocked to see her so composed. For once, it was his silence that filled the room. Mercy showed the judge the flash drive footage, the bank records, the texts, and then the final bombshell, proof that he'd tried to coerce her into signing over her inheritance. The courtroom gasped. Michael stammered, but his words meant nothing now. The judge adjourned for sentencing, and Mercy walked out without looking back. She had broken free, not with screams or revenge, but with truth and action. Silence had once been her prison. Now it was her weapon. The court ruling came swiftly. Michael was sentenced to 4 years in prison for fraud and emotional abuse. Mercy didn't attend the final hearing. She didn't need to. Justice wasn't about watching him fall. It was about reclaiming herself. She sat by the window of her new apartment, hand on her belly, listening to the silence. But this time it was peaceful, not suffocating. She began journaling again. Each morning, she wrote letters to her unborn child, telling stories of strength, survival, and truth. There was no more fear in her home. No more secrets hiding in the silence. Just hope. Quiet but powerful. One afternoon, Adiz showed up again. This time, not with warnings or guilt, but with a file. "I did some digging too," she said. "He had another account. One you might need access to." Mercy hesitated, then took the folder. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protection. Her child deserved a future free of shadows. They sat in silence, two women who had once been rivals, now allies in healing. Adiz apologized sincerely this time. Mercy forgave her, not because she forgot but because she refused to carry that weight any longer. The silence between them ended with understanding, not blame. Thunder rumbled the night Mercy went into labor. Alone but not afraid, she made it to the hospital with the help of her neighbor. Hours later, she gave birth to a baby girl. The first time she held her, Mercy whispered, "You saved me." The child's eyes were closed, but Mercy felt seen for the first time in years. She named her Amani, meaning peace. As she cradled her daughter, Mercy made a silent vow. No lies. No silence. Just love. The cycle had ended. A new life had begun. A month later, Mercy was invited to speak on a national talk show. She hesitated. She wasn't one for public attention. But when she stepped onto the stage, lights glaring and cameras rolling, she told her story. Not for fame, but for the thousands of women who were still trapped in silent marriages, confused by polite violence. The host asked, "What would you say to your past self?" Mercy smiled sadly and replied, "Speak, even if your voice shakes. Because silence doesn't keep the peace. It protects the pain." The crowd rose in applause. Her story had touched hearts, and maybe even saved lives. Mercy sat under the same guava tree at her mother's house, baby Amani sleeping in her arms. She opened her journal and wrote one final letter. "Dear Michael, I don't hate you. I don't miss you. I just finally see who I am without you, and I love her." She closed the journal and breathed deeply. Her mother joined her, smiling gently. "You came back," she said. Mercy nodded. But not the same. The silence between them was warm, peaceful, full of love, not fear. Mercy had finally found her voice. And in doing so, she'd given her daughter the greatest gift of all, a future free of silence. The moral lesson of this story is that silence is not always golden. Sometimes it's a cage. Real love requires communication, truth, and mutual respect. When you lose your voice in a relationship, you begin to lose yourself. Speak up. Because your silence might be the loudest scream for help you'll ever give. To see how this story unfolds, like, share and subscribe to the channel, and write where you are watching from. Only on African Tales by DeFlores. Thank you.